right, this is session 4 of looking at the dark forces that are reshaping the world. So we're going to look at 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4 through 9, and then we'll look at Jude, verse 6. And these tie together. 2 Peter 2 and verse 4. Because all of these things that we're going to be looking at in Scripture are ghosts from the past of what's coming in our future at the end times. Peter said in 2 Peter 2, 4, "For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them into the chains of darkness, to be reserved unto judgment," and so now he ties the flood to the angels that sinned. That's a significant connection. "And spared not the old world, pre-flood, but saved Noah, the eighth person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly. And turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah," another connection that Jesus said to the end times, "turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemned them with an overthrow, making them an ensample unto those that after should live ungodly. And delivered just Lot, vexed," and here we see what we're living through right now, just like Lot. "We are vexed with the filthy conversation of the wicked."
Amen to that.
So that's what's going on around us today, because we have returned, just as Jesus said we would, to those times. And then in Jude, verse 6, I love the little book of Jude. It is so packed with truths. The whole Bible is, but Jude is just really hard-hitting. And Jude says in verse 6, "And the angels which kept not their first estate." Okay, so there were angels who had their first estate. They did not keep that, but they changed to a different estate. That is, they gave up something and took on something else. That's the fallen angels. "But left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains unto darkness, unto the judgment of the great day, even as Sodom and Gomorrah, and the cities about them in like manner, giving themselves over to fornication, and going after strange flesh." So if anybody ever tells you why the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah was inhospitable spirit, they were not hospitable. Look at what Jude said. Jude said they went after strange flesh. Okay, if I need to explain that, I really don't want to have to. Strange flesh, fornication of an unnatural sort. And set forth, for an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. Anybody who tells you that the fire is temporary, God's going to let people out, it says right here it's eternal. Okay. So, Jesus connected up Noah's time, the situation with Sodom and Gomorrah, to his return. Those things are mirror images, if you will. We've talked about this before, but you just need to be aware of it because we're all subject to it. It's something called normalcy bias. We are all biased toward normalcy. Tomorrow will probably be like today, because yesterday was normal and the day before that was okay. And so tomorrow will probably be okay. This displays itself. You're sitting in a restaurant and you hear pop, pop, pop. And you think, why? Some kids are playing with firecrackers. And then you think, what is that red running down my chest? A little too graphic? I can never tell. Normalcy bias. People who invest in the stock market suffer from this as well. They think that tomorrow it's going to be as good. And yet today, the stock market dropped 200 points today, didn't it? I think. So beware that you need to have your antenna up. You don't need to be living at a level 10 of awareness all the time, but you probably need to be at a level 3 with your radar up and you're paying attention to what's going on around you. Yeah, a lot of people and many in the church, and we're going to talk about the apostasy of the church. It is just off the charts. They have slowly but surely, as a frog, been boiled in that water. They have accepted a little bit more and more, slowly but surely, and there's so many in the so-called churches that are boiled. Yeah, this group, we're not saying normalcy. By this group, we're all here. We're all thinking, where's Jesus? Tomorrow can't be the same as yesterday. Yeah, I pray that very regularly for my preaching and teaching. Lord, whatever else is true, keep me telling the truth, not falseness. Yeah, teachers have a bigger responsibility, James said. Yeah. All right. So, why in the world are things so bad? What explains why? Now, this is a rhetorical question because you all pretty much know the answer. This is a rhetorical question for anybody who might be watching on YouTube. Why is the world so bad? What explains that? If you walk up to the average American and say to the guy on the street, why is America so bad? Why is the world so bad? And it's getting worse. And this next phrase is sarcasm. Why is evolution failing us? Why aren't we evolving and becoming more sophisticated? Why is it getting worse? Yeah, we're in the way. That's exactly right. Oh, yeah, it's like over in Revelation when the witnesses are killed. They throw a party. They send gifts to you. They're that happy they're dead. That's how they're going to be about us when we're gone. Some of them we have warned and they weren't ready and they'll wake up. So that was sarcasm. And I use sarcasm in teaching because Jesus did. So, but if you would walk up to a second century Jew, second temple Jew, second century, no, the second temple, yes. The second temple era is the era of Jesus. And so if you walked up to a second temple Jew and asked, why do things look like they do in the world? Why is there so much of all this going on? They wouldn't tell you what the average Christian would. The average Christian would be able to tell you Genesis chapter 3. The average Christian would know that's the explanation. But they know that it's actually three different experiences that cause the world to be so messed up. And that's what we're going to dive into and look at deeply. The three rebellions, both angelic and human. So I would suggest to you that there is a more grande reset going on than the Great Reset that we hear Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum talking. We've talked about this quite a bit because it's a timely thing. They're moving us in the direction they want us to go. But I want to suggest to you that God is getting ready for a greater reset, a more grande reset, because it is both physical and spiritual. So there's going to be the rapture of the church. That's physical and spiritual. What God is going to bring on the earth, well, you can read about it in the early chapters of the book of Revelation. But do that just before you go to bed. There really is a huge reshuffling going on of the powers in the world. We talked a little bit before about it, Russia, China, the United States. But, it's not just these three big powers, but there is that. We could spend the rest of the night talking about the reshuffling that's going on there. But you've got the Middle East. You've got Europe. Actually, I don't know any place on the earth where the reshuffling is not. The repower shuffling is not. Reshuffling is not going on among the powers that be. Nothing like it in my lifetime. I don't know when there was ever a time when a global reshuffling of these kind of things was going. This is the only time it's ever happened. And we're living it. Aren't you glad? Didn't you always want to go back to the times of Jesus? Well, here we are. So, this is going to end up where we've talked many times about it. There's going to be a one world leader. The Antichrist is going to, I think, stand up out of the dust, and everybody's going to be ready for somebody to have the answer for all of the cataclysm that's going on in the world. And so the force multipliers are things like the pandemic. Do we need to talk about how the pandemic gave power to some people, whether it's the World Economic Forum or our president or the World Health Organization. They were able to grab so much power, and that never goes the other direction. They don't ever lose power. It always only goes that one direction. And so the pandemic's just one example. We've got several of those things going on that have really accelerated what we have been seeing. And I want to then talk about the apostasy of the church because it's made easier for them to be able to grab this power, has been made easier because the church has not been what the church was supposed to be. Our power to restrain is waning. And the pandemic did some good things. In our church, the shaking, just kind of a little snapshot, in our church, the shaking showed us who were Christians you could count on and who you couldn't. Right?
Yeah.
You know, that's what a separator does. Anybody know what a milk separator does? Okay. So the separating has been going on. That shaking of the last 3 years has revealed much. I mean, you shake a tree and you find out which fruit was the ripest and which wasn't ready. That's a picture of what we've been seeing. And the apostasy of the church is like that. The church has turned back so, you could actually say the apostasy was on, but, you know, exponentially the last 3 years.
Oh, yeah.
So just several examples of what I'm talking about that have made the church weak, that have allowed the forces of the Antichrist to be stronger. One aberrant theological view gaining ground within, and I call it the church so-called, because anymore you don't know what you're walking into. I just saw a Facebook post today where a church is making their new interim pastor. He's a guy who's been divorced. Maybe you would have seen that 50 years ago. He's done serious damage to some missionaries that I know financially, not made any restitution. And a whole bunch of other bad things about this guy. And yet, in a Baptist church, he's going to be the interim pastor. This theological view that is aberrant in the church so-called is dominion theology. We've talked the last few weeks a little bit about dominion. You know what the word dominion, take dominion, have dominion. You have power over it. That theology. Jesus' return is when the church gains sufficient dominance. As soon as we elect the right president, as soon as we get the power in science and medicine and education, as soon as we finally control that with people who are godly and Christian, then Jesus will come back. And I'm talking about among Southern Baptists. I mean, you expect that kind of foolishness from the liberal denominations, but it's infiltrated the conservative denominations as well. This is just a warmed over postmillennialism. Postmillennialism died out at the end of World War II pretty much because that the world getting better and better and better didn't work out so well. It was getting worse and worse and worse. And so the idea that we're going to make the world Christian and then Jesus will come back, that doesn't seem to work. I was just listening to a couple of Calvinists, powerful, influential Calvinists on YouTube talking about, they said one thing was that dispensational theology is the most dangerous theology out there right now. That's us. And they said that, yeah, it's not looking so good, but surely there'll be a change one of these days and we're going to get that power back. Unbelievable. So we talked about the 7 mountains of the New Apostolic Reformation. This is kind of under the radar, but a really big, broad group. You can think Bethel, Hillsong, some of those gigantic churches. This is what they believe. And so these folks, this is what this aberrant theology has made its way into a lot of churches. You can also think the same way with Tim Mackey of the Bible Project, and maybe you don't know what the Bible Project is. A pretty big deal. A lot of churches use the information, and Mackey's idea is basically the same thing. Heaven, Mackey says, heaven is where Jesus is. Jesus is where all of us Christians are. Ergo, heaven is on the earth. And hell is when we're disobedient to God and do mean things to each other. Yeah, and Mackey even will tell you that hell will eventually be emptied. God will give all those people a second chance to get out of hell. And if you're in hell, you're going to take whatever comes along, right? I mean, everybody will be emptied out. Yeah, I'm just saying these things have taken foothold in the church, and it's a part of the apostasy that was predicted. I had a Christian not too long ago say, there's certainly going to be an uprising that people are going to take back, and sanity is going to return. Not if you believe the Bible.
Nope.
And that's actually good news. Another movement infiltrating the church is, and we all know about this, wokeism. Does anybody not know what being woke means? Do I need to explain that? Okay. Black Lives Matters, social justice, we need to pay reparations to the black people, and all of that.
You mean like our mayor?
Yeah. And the funny thing about that is, this is just a little tidbit, we've been paying reparations to black people ever since Lyndon Johnson brought in his Give the Money to the Black People projects. We've been paying reparations ever since, and that hasn't worked out so well for the black people. That has not helped them. Okay, so think Andy Stanley. Andy Stanley, we've talked about it before. He says, why, some of you gays, the way you've been treated by so-called Christians, that you would still want to come to church, you have greater faith than I do. And so he's set out to make a mega church. He's got a mega church. This mega church is going to be a gay-friendly church. Okay? What would have happened to that 30, 40 years ago? Not even that far back, but certainly that far back. Would never been accepted. We've talked about all of these things that are a part of wokeism, and it's everywhere. The huge implications, as far as I'm concerned, Stanley ought to listen to this. He's not smart enough to get it. He's a smart guy, but he's not real smart. The huge implication is that the history of apologizing to these groups only makes them hate you all the more. They never come around and say thank you. So it won't work. Another implication is that it actually diminishes the light that we're supposed to be shining in the darkness. We're not supposed to be embracing the darkness. We're supposed to be casting the darkness out with the light of the truth of the gospel.
Amen.
And so the church is weak. The church is apostate. Just as Paul and Jesus said that it would be. Yet another movement infiltrating the church, so-called, is the Christian anti-Semitism that's growing, or replacement theology. Anywhere you see in the Bible Israel or Jews, insert church, Christian. All those promises, they're for us. And Israel no longer matters. This creeping belief that this transition is what God intended. In fact, some of the guys like Martin Luther, he finally came around to preaching that you need to persecute the Jew because God hates him. You need to burn their buildings down. You need to destroy their businesses because they killed Christ and God hates them. So to some extent, this is not anything new, but it's coming back around again. So the dark force behind the curtain, so to speak, this anti-Semitism, is ultimately going to make it easier for people to persecute, hate, and kill the Jew and Israel. As the church stops seeing Israel as special, God's people, Well, we were the only friend they had.
Yeah.
They got no more friends in the world. They're all by themselves. I remember a few years ago, it's been 15 years ago, maybe. I was listening on a political thing on television, and this Jewish rabbi or teacher, I don't remember whether he's a rabbi or not, was talking about Jewish American Christian relations. And the guy was asked, the inquisitor asked this Jewish man, but what do you say to the American Christian who is your best friend? And his response was telling. He said, they are our friend today. The Jews understand. They're a permanently persecuted group of people. And the church has been what has kept Satan off of their back for all these years. It's coming to a close. So they're all by themselves. The flip side of replacement theology is the Jewish roots movement. You've probably heard a little bit about this, but maybe never dived into it too far. You don't need to too far. This is a tactic of the enemy to kind of muddy the waters. Who's a Jew? What about salvation? Which, of course, is as old as what Paul was dealing with back in what we've been doing in our book of Acts. Some of this group believe in Jesus, and some reject Jesus. They also, many of them, reject all of Paul's teachings. All of them in the Jewish roots movement believed that somehow associated with the keeping of the law, the Torah, and the feasts and all that Jewish stuff was your way to heaven. They're not all the same, so it's kind of hard to nail, but all of them believe it to some extent in some form, that following the Torah and the law is connected to salvation. Many, and I'm told most, are Gentiles. Gentiles who have looked and said, yeah, this is Jewish, that's the way. And so they convert to it. Some Jewish rabbis have talked about the conversions of Gentiles has been almost overwhelming to them. So the three rebellions that explain why the world the way that it is, and are precursors, shadows, ghosts, if you will, of what's coming back. Genesis 3, we're not going to talk a lot about that because we've talked a lot about it. You know Genesis 3, the fall of humanity, and that was about Satan trying to disrupt the human-divine family. The second one is Genesis 6, and the goal there was to break the messianic bloodline. We'll talk about how that could be. To corrupt humanity. What does it mean to be a human being? What's that sound like? Transhumanism? To corrupt humanity and to institute the giants breeding program. So the fallen angels had sex with women, and the result of that were giants. So don't conflict the two. The fallen angels are not the giants. The giants are the result of that. And we'll talk in great detail about what that actually was. The third event or rebellion was the Tower of Babel in Genesis chapter 11. And the goal here was global satanic dominion. Nimrod is actually a picture of the Antichrist and what he's going to do again. And we'll talk in great detail about that. These rebellions that took place are each a different attack vector against humans. Humans are the ones who have the stamp of the Creator. We are the ones who bear the image of the Creator. You know, you can say whatever you want to. Cows and pigs and cats and dogs don't have that. Whatever else is going on, if God wants to take them all to heaven, God can do what He wants to. I won't be happy about it, but He can do what He wants to. But the only ones who are image bearers are human beings. And Satan's goal was to attack that and mess that up. And we talked a little bit about this. I'm not going to spend any more time on it. But when Satan came in the temptation of Christ, Satan wants to know what's going on.
Amen.
And understand.
That's right.
And I love the thought of that.
Yep.
But it's 8 o'clock. So next week, we will begin to look at that first attack and then move very quickly to the second attack, because there's a lot to be said about Genesis 6 and maybe even more about the Tower of Babel that explains why the world is so bad and why it's getting worse. But we'll stop there.